The fluorescent lights of the Piggly Wiggly supermarket buzzed overhead as Melissa Trent pushed her shopping cart down the cereal aisle, her white canvas sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. It was 7:47 p.m. on a humid Thursday evening in July 1989, and the store was nearly empty except for a stock boy stacking cans and an elderly couple debating over coffee brands 3 aisles over. Melissa, 23 years old with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail, wore denim shorts and a pink tank top, her skin still warm from the day's relentless Florida sun. She had stopped at this Ocala grocery store on her drive home from visiting her sister in Gainesville, intending to grab milk and bread before the 30-minute journey back to her apartment. The air conditioning inside the store felt like a blessing after the oppressive heat outside, where the temperature still hung at 87 degrees, even as darkness crept across the parking lot. She reached for a box of Cheerios, her engagement ring catching the light, and that's when she felt it, that inexplicable sensation of being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the aisle behind her, but saw nothing except empty space and the distant figure of the stock boy. She shook off the feeling, told herself she was being paranoid, and moved toward the dairy section. Her red Honda Civic sat in the parking lot, 3rd row from the entrance, driver's side window cracked open because the air conditioning had been acting up all week. She had maybe 15 more minutes of shopping to do. She would never make it back to that car. Security footage would later show her placing items in her cart near the milk coolers at 7:52 p.m. But by 8:03 p.m., her abandoned cart would be found in aisle 7, a gallon of milk sweating condensation onto the floor beside it, her purse still tucked in the child seat, wallet and keys untouched. The automatic doors at the rear emergency exit would be discovered slightly ajar, leading out to the loading dock where delivery trucks came and went. No one had seen her leave. No one had heard her scream. Melissa Trent had simply vanished into the thick, humid Florida night, leaving behind only questions that would haunt her family for decades and terror that would grip this quiet community for years to come. If my story resonates with you, please hit the like button to bring a little light to this father's heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my upcoming life stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from and what time it is there right now. It makes me so happy to know what corner of the country or world you're listening from. Before that July evening, Melissa Ann Trent was everything a young woman in 1989 Central Florida could hope to be. She had graduated from the University of Florida just 2 years earlier, with a degree in elementary education, and had already secured a position teaching 2nd grade at Horizon Elementary School in Ocala. The children adored her. Parents praised her patience and creativity. She lived in a modest 1-bedroom apartment on Silver Springs Boulevard, saved money diligently, and had just gotten engaged 3 months prior to her disappearance to her college sweetheart, David Hoffman, a computer programmer at a local insurance company. They had planned a spring wedding for 1990. Melissa was the youngest of 3 daughters born to Robert and Patricia Trent, a retired machinist and a hospital nurse, respectively, both pillars of their small church community. She volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, loved Stephen King novels, collected porcelain dolls, and had a laugh that friends described as infectious. Ocala itself in 1989 was a city caught between its rural horse farming heritage and the creeping modernization that Interstate 75 had brought. With a population hovering around 45,000, it was the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked, where high school football games drew the whole town, where a missing person wasn't something anyone could comprehend. The Trent family had lived there for 3 generations. This was home, this was safe until it wasn't. That Thursday evening began like any other in the Trent household. Robert Trent had spent the afternoon repairing a fence in the backyard, while Patricia worked a half shift at Monroe Regional Medical Center. Melissa had told her mother that morning she would be driving to Gainesville to help her sister Karen pack up her dorm room, as Karen was transferring to a different college for the fall semester. The drive was routine, Interstate 75 North, a straight shot that Melissa had made dozens of times. She called her parents from Karen's dorm at 4:30 p.m. using the hallway payphone, letting them know she would be home by 9 or 9:30, depending on when she left. Patricia reminded her to drive carefully and told her there was leftover meatloaf in the refrigerator. That was the last time they heard their daughter's voice. When 9:30 came and went without a call, Patricia felt the first flutter of worry in her chest. But she reasoned that Melissa must have stayed longer than planned, chatting with Karen, maybe grabbing dinner together. By 10 o'clock, the worry had transformed into something sharper. Patricia tried calling Melissa's apartment, letting the phone ring 15-20 times, the shrill sound echoing in her ear with no answer. By 10:30, both parents were standing in the living room, looking at each other with growing dread. Robert suggested driving by Melissa's apartment to see if her car was there. They made the 12-minute drive in silence, Patricia's hands twisted together in her lap. The parking lot of Melissa's apartment complex was illuminated by a single streetlight that cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. Her designated spot was empty. No red Honda Civic. No sign of their daughter. They knocked on her apartment door anyway, knowing it was futile. The silence that greeted them felt cavernous. Meanwhile, 37 miles away at the Piggly Wiggly in Ocala, night manager Vernon Walsh was locking up the store at 10:15 p.m. when he noticed the abandoned shopping cart. Store policy dictated that all carts be returned to their proper areas before closing, and this one sat conspicuously in the middle of aisle 7, its contents still inside. He approached it, irritated that one of his employees had been so careless. But when he saw the purse in the child's seat, genuine alarm began to register. He called out, thinking perhaps a customer was still in the store, maybe in the restroom. No response. He walked the entire store, checked both bathrooms, even looked in the employee break room. Nothing. The purse sat there, undisturbed, and Vernon's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the phone behind the customer service desk to call the police. He didn't touch the purse or the cart. Something about the scene felt deeply wrong. When Officer James Crawford arrived at 10:47 p.m., he found Vernon standing guard over the cart like a sentinel. Crawford, a 15-year veteran of the Ocala Police Department with thinning hair and a methodical approach to everything, took one look at the abandoned cart and felt his stomach drop. He had responded to shoplifting calls, domestic disputes, drunk and disorderly conduct, but this was different. This felt ominous. He asked Vernon if anyone had witnessed anything unusual. Vernon shook his head, explained that there had only been a handful of customers in the store that evening, and by the time he noticed the cart, the store had been closed for 15 minutes. Crawford radioed for backup and carefully examined the purse. Inside he found a wallet containing a driver's license with the name Melissa Ann Trent, credit cards, $37 in cash, car keys on a keychain with a small stuffed bear attached. Her identification photo showed a young woman with a bright smile and kind eyes. He checked the parking lot and found the red Honda Civic exactly where Vernon said it had been parked all evening. Windows cracked, doors locked, no signs of disturbance. By midnight, Robert and Patricia Trent were sitting in the Ocala Police Department, their faces pale under the harsh fluorescent lighting, giving statements to Detective Raymond Morris, a stocky man in his late 40s with a graying mustache who had been roused from sleep to handle what was quickly being classified as a potential abduction. He listened as Patricia described their daughter in minute detail, her voice breaking repeatedly, while Robert sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Detective Morris took copious notes. He asked about boyfriends, recent arguments, money troubles, anything that might suggest Melissa had reasons to disappear voluntarily. Patricia bristled at the implication. Her daughter was getting married. She loved her job. She had no reason to run away. David Hoffman was brought in for questioning at 1:30 a.m., still wearing the t-shirt and gym shorts he had been sleeping in when police knocked on his door. He was devastated, confused, desperate to help. He provided his whereabouts for the entire evening. He had been at his parents' house for a family dinner, arrived at 6 p.m., left around 9:30 p.m., and had at least 8 people who could verify his alibi. Detective Morris believed him. The raw anguish on David's face was not the expression of a guilty man. By the time the sun rose on Friday morning, the Ocala Police Department had officially opened a missing persons investigation, though internally, everyone involved knew they were likely looking at something far more sinister. The first 48 hours of any missing persons case are critical, and Detective Morris assembled a team that worked around the clock. Officers canvassed the Piggly Wiggly neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual Thursday evening. A woman who lived in an apartment complex behind the grocery store reported seeing a dark-colored van parked near the loading dock area around 8 p.m., but she hadn't thought anything of it at the time. She couldn't provide more details. No license plate, no description of the driver, just a vague memory of a van that might have been blue or black or dark green. It wasn't much, but it was something. The security footage from inside the Piggly Wiggly showed Melissa shopping normally, alone, no indication that anyone was following her or paying her particular attention. The timestamp showed her last appearance near the dairy coolers at 7:52 p.m., and then nothing. The cameras didn't cover the rear emergency exit or the loading dock area, a security oversight that would haunt Vernon Walsh for the rest of his life. Police interviewed every employee who had been working that night. The stock boy, 19-year-old Marcus Webb, remembered seeing Melissa briefly, but insisted he hadn't noticed anything strange. The elderly couple who had been shopping confirmed they saw a young woman matching Melissa's description, but had been too focused on their own shopping to notice when she disappeared. A massive search operation was launched. Volunteers from the community, numbering in the hundreds, combed through nearby woods, searched drainage ditches, walked the shoulders of highways. Local media ran Melissa's photo constantly. Her face appeared on the front page of the Ocala Star banner, on evening news broadcasts, on flyers stapled to telephone poles throughout Marion County. Tips poured into the police department, dozens of them, most leading nowhere. Someone claimed to have seen her hitchhiking on Route 40. Another caller insisted she had gotten into a white pickup truck willingly at a gas station 30 miles away. None of these leads panned out. Days turned into weeks, and the hope that had initially buoyed the Trent family began to curdle into something darker. Years passed with excruciating slowness for those who loved Melissa Trent. The police investigation, once so urgent and all-consuming, gradually shifted to the back burner as other cases demanded attention, though Detective Morris never fully let go of it. He kept the case file on his desk, reviewed it periodically, followed up on tips when they came in, which became increasingly rare. Robert Trent became obsessed with finding his daughter, spending weekends driving rural roads, searching abandoned properties, following any lead no matter how improbable. Patricia withdrew into herself, her nursing shifts becoming the only routine that kept her tethered to normalcy. She left Melissa's bedroom exactly as it had been, the porcelain dolls arranged on shelves, the Stephen King paperbacks stacked on the nightstand, the bed made with the floral comforter Melissa had picked out at JCPenney. The porch light stayed on every single night, a beacon for a daughter who never came home. David Hoffman tried to move on with his life, though the guilt of surviving, of eventually dating again, of getting married to someone else in 1993, never fully left him. Melissa's older sisters, Karen and Jennifer, both struggled with the loss in different ways. Karen developed anxiety so severe she could barely leave her house for years. Jennifer became a victims' rights advocate, channeling her grief into helping other families navigate the nightmare of having a loved one vanish. The Ocala community never forgot Melissa Trent, but as the years accumulated, 1990, 1991, 1992, stretching into the mid-90s, her case became one of many cold cases filed away in the Marion County Sheriff's Office. A tragedy without resolution, a family without closure. However, in 2005, 16 years after Melissa's disappearance, something changed. The Marion County Sheriff's Office received a grant to re-examine cold cases, using advances in forensic DNA technology that hadn't existed in 1989. A young detective named Sarah Chen, fresh from completing specialized training in cold case investigation, was assigned to review the Trent case among others. She spent weeks going through every piece of evidence that had been preserved, reading every witness statement, studying every dead-end lead. What struck her was the mention of that dark-colored van seen near the loading dock. It had been dismissed as too vague to pursue meaningfully, but Detective Chen had a different perspective. She cross-referenced other unsolved cases in Central Florida from the same era and found a disturbing pattern. Between 1987 and 1991, 5 women between the ages of 19 and 29 had vanished from grocery stores, gas stations, and shopping centers in a corridor stretching from Ocala to Daytona Beach. All had disappeared in the evening hours. None of the cases had ever been officially connected because they fell under different jurisdictions, and in the pre-internet, pre-digital database era of the 1980s, information sharing between departments was limited. But now, looking at them together, Detective Chen saw something that made her blood run cold. She compiled her findings and presented them to her supervisor, Lieutenant Frank Delgado, a grizzled veteran who had been on the force when Melissa disappeared. He listened carefully, studied her charts and timelines, and agreed there was enough circumstantial evidence to warrant reopening the investigation with a focus on a potential serial predator. The breakthrough came not from fancy forensic techniques, but from old-fashioned detective work combined with a stroke of luck. Detective Chen began the painstaking process of tracking down everyone who had worked at or frequented the Piggly Wiggly in July 1989. Most of the employees had moved on, scattered across the state or the country, but she persisted. She found Marcus Webb, the former stockboy, now a manager at a Home Depot in Jacksonville. She found Vernon Walsh, the night manager, who had retired and moved to Georgia. She found checkout clerks, baggers, truck drivers who had made deliveries to the store. And then she found the name Thomas Harland. He had been a delivery truck driver for a regional food distributor, making runs to grocery stores throughout Central Florida. His name appeared in the store's delivery logs for July 20th, 1989, the day Melissa disappeared. He had made a delivery to the Piggly Wiggly at 7:15 p.m., dropping off a shipment of canned goods and frozen vegetables. Detective Chen ran a background check on Harland and felt adrenaline surge through her veins. He had a criminal history, arrests for assault in 1985 and 1987, charges that had been pled down. More significantly, after 1992, he seemed to have vanished from public records. No tax filings, no address changes, no documented employment. For 13 years, Thomas Harland had been a ghost, but in 2005, something brought him back into the system. He had been arrested in Panama City, Florida, for attempting to abduct a woman from a Walmart parking lot. The woman had fought back, screamed, drawn attention, and Harland had fled. But security cameras had captured his license plate. He was currently awaiting trial. Detective Chen drove 3 hours to Panama City and sat across from Thomas Harland in an interview room at the Bay County Jail. He was 58 years old now, his hair completely gray, his face weathered and marked by years of hard living. She showed him a photo of Melissa Trent. He claimed he didn't recognize her, said he couldn't remember specific deliveries from 16 years ago, insisted he had no idea what she was talking about. But Chen was patient. She had done her homework. She told him about the other missing women, about the pattern, about the timeline that placed him in the vicinity of multiple disappearances. She explained that forensic teams were currently searching properties he had owned or rented in the early 90s. She let him know that DNA technology had advanced considerably, that evidence from 1989 that couldn't be processed then could be processed now. She watched his face carefully, looking for tells, for cracks in his composure. And then she said something that made him flinch. She mentioned that investigators had found a storage unit in Hernando County that had been rented under a false name, but connected to him through a paper trail. Inside that storage unit, they had discovered personal items belonging to several of the missing women. A purse, jewelry, clothing, items that could only have come from the victims. Harland's attorney, present for the interview, immediately shut down the questioning, but the damage was done. Detective Chen had seen the recognition in Harland's eyes, the momentary loss of control. She knew she had her man. The forensic evidence gathered over the following months was damning. Items found in Harland's storage unit were matched to missing women through DNA analysis and family identification. A necklace belonging to a woman who had disappeared from a gas station in Palatka in 1988. A driver's license belonging to a woman who had vanished from a shopping center in Ormond Beach in 1990. And most crucially for the Trent family, a small stuffed bear keychain that Patricia Trent immediately identified as belonging to Melissa. It had been a gift from David, attached to her car keys, and it should have been found with her purse at the Piggly Wiggly, but somehow it had gone missing from evidence storage. The discovery of that keychain in Harland's possession was the smoking gun. Further investigation revealed that Harland had lived a double life throughout the late 80s and early 90s. By day, he was a delivery truck driver with access to dozens of locations and a legitimate reason to be in parking lots and loading areas. By night, he was a predator who stalked women, watching their patterns, waiting for moments of vulnerability. The van mentioned by the witness near the Piggly Wiggly had belonged to him, a personal vehicle he drove separate from his work truck. Investigators theorized that he had been at the store making a delivery, had seen Melissa shopping alone, and had waited for his opportunity. The rear emergency exit provided the perfect escape route. In the chaos and understaffing typical of retail environments, no one would have noticed a delivery driver lingering a bit longer than necessary. The prosecution's case was built on a combination of circumstantial evidence, forensic findings, and the testimony of the woman from Panama City who had survived Harland's 2005 attempted abduction. She took the stand and described in harrowing detail how a man had approached her in a parking lot, tried to grab her and attempted to force her toward a van. Her fight, her screams, her refusal to be a victim, had saved her life and ultimately led to the unraveling of crimes that had gone unpunished for decades. The trial began in November 2006, 17 years after Melissa Trent had pushed a shopping cart down the cereal aisle of a Ocala grocery store. The courtroom was packed every day. The Trent family sat in the front row, Robert now 71 years old, his hair white, his hands shaking with age and emotion, Patricia beside him, her face lined with grief that had become a permanent part of her features. Melissa's sisters attended every session. David Hoffman came, bringing his wife, needing to bear witness to the conclusion of a nightmare that had shaped his entire adult life. The families of the other victims were there too, a collective representation of lives destroyed, futures stolen, decades of not knowing. Thomas Harland showed no remorse throughout the proceedings. He sat at the defense table with an expression of blank indifference, occasionally whispering to his attorney, never looking at the families, never acknowledging the devastation he had caused. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned with guilty verdicts on multiple counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and related charges. When the verdict was read, Patricia Trent wept. Not tears of joy, because there was no joy to be found in any of this, but tears of relief that the monster who had taken her daughter finally had a name and a face and would face consequences. Harland was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Blackwell, read the sentence with a steady voice that carried the weight of justice delayed but not denied. She spoke directly to Harland, telling him that his actions had not only destroyed the lives of his victims, but had inflicted immeasurable suffering on families, friends, and entire communities. She acknowledged that no sentence could bring back the women he had killed, or restore the years of anguish their loved ones had endured, but she hoped the verdict would provide some measure of closure. During the sentencing, Detective Sarah Chen sat in the gallery, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the knowledge that her persistence had finally brought this case to resolution. After the trial concluded, there was still the painful matter of finding Melissa's remains. Harland, even when faced with life imprisonment, refused to disclose the locations where he had disposed of his victims' bodies. Investigators searched properties he had lived on, areas where he had worked, remote locations in rural Florida. In March 2007, a team searching a densely wooded area off County Road 225, about 40 miles from where Melissa had disappeared, found skeletal remains that were eventually identified through DNA analysis as belonging to her. Patricia Trent, now 73 years old, was finally able to bury her daughter. The funeral took place on a bright April morning, 18 years after Melissa had vanished. Hundreds of people attended, some who had known Melissa personally, many who had simply followed her case and felt connected to her story. They buried her in the same cemetery where her grandparents rested, under an oak tree that provided dappled shade. The relief that swept through Ocala and the surrounding communities was palpable. For years there had been whispers, fears that a predator walked among them, that any woman could be next. Parents had warned their daughters to be careful, to stay in groups, to never let their guard down. The anxiety had been a low hum in the background of daily life, sometimes forgotten, but never fully gone. Now, with Harland behind bars, there was a collective exhale. The monster had been caught. Justice, though delayed, had prevailed, but the case left scars that would never fully heal. Robert Trent passed away in 2009 at the age of 74, his health having declined rapidly after Melissa's funeral. Friends said he had held on just long enough to see his daughter laid to rest properly. Patricia lived until 2013, spending her final years surrounded by her 2 surviving daughters and their families, finding what peace she could in the knowledge that Melissa's killer would never hurt anyone else again. Detective Morris, who had worked the original 1989 investigation, attended both of their funerals, carrying the guilt of not having solved the case when it mattered most, even though everyone who knew him understood that the limitations of technology and resources at the time had made solving it nearly impossible. Detective Sarah Chen continued working cold cases, her success with the Trent investigation inspiring other departments to take second looks at unsolved disappearances from decades past. Her work would eventually lead to the resolution of 3 more of Harland's suspected victims, bringing closure to additional families. The Melissa Trent case became a turning point in how Florida law enforcement approached missing persons investigations, particularly those involving young women. It highlighted the importance of interjurisdictional communication, the value of maintaining evidence properly for future technological advances, and the need for never giving up on cases simply because time had passed. Training protocols were updated, database systems were improved. The lessons learned from this tragedy were applied to prevent future ones. But perhaps most importantly, Melissa's case ensured that she would never be forgotten. She was not just a statistic, not just another name in a cold case file, but a real person with dreams and plans and people who loved her. In Ocala, a scholarship fund was established in her name, providing financial assistance to education majors at the University of Florida, ensuring that her passion for teaching would continue to impact lives, even though she never had the chance to grow old in the profession she loved. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, people gather at a small memorial garden that was created in her honor at Horizon Elementary School, the school where she taught for those 2 brief years before her life was cut short. The case also sparked conversations about safety, about awareness, about the random nature of violence, and the importance of community vigilance. It reminded people that evil can exist in ordinary places, that danger can strike in the mundane setting of a grocery store on a Thursday evening, that the monsters we fear are not abstract, but real people who live among us. But it also demonstrated the power of perseverance, the importance of never forgetting victims, and the possibility that even the coldest cases can eventually find resolution when dedicated investigators refuse to give up. Thomas Harland will die in prison, his name forever associated with cruelty and violence, his legacy one of pain and loss. But the women he victimized, particularly Melissa Ann Trent, will be remembered differently, not as victims, but as daughters, sisters, friends, and members of communities that never stopped fighting for them. When the sun sets over Ocala now, casting long shadows across the horse farms and oak trees that define this part of Florida, there is a quietness that feels different from the anxious silence that once gripped the town. Parents still warn their children to be careful, to be aware of their surroundings, to trust their instincts. The Piggly Wiggly where Melissa disappeared has long since closed, replaced by a newer grocery store with updated security systems and cameras covering every angle. But those who remember that July night in 1989 can still picture a young woman pushing a shopping cart, still feel the collective heartbreak of a community that lost one of its own, still understand that safety is never guaranteed and that vigilance is always necessary. Yet there is also hope in the resolution, a reminder that justice, though sometimes agonizingly slow, can prevail. That investigators who care, who persist, who refuse to let cases languish forgotten, can make a difference. That families who endure the unendurable can find some measure of peace even if the wounds never fully heal. The story of Melissa Trent is a tragedy, but it is also a testament to the strength of those who loved her, the dedication of those who sought justice for her, and the resilience of a community that refused to let her memory fade into obscurity. She was 23 years old when her life was stolen from her, robbed of the future she had planned, the children she would have taught, the life she would have built with David, the years she should have had with her family. But in the years since her death, her impact has rippled outward in ways both seen and unseen, ensuring that her brief time on this earth mattered profoundly and continues to matter still.